What? What? I'm your fucking closer. Let's do this. Let's go. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here at this talk about tactical awakening on inventing the sacred. This talk is different from the conspiracy theory themed talk described in the brochure. I saw that Mark Pilkington was on the lineup, and I did not want to present something redundant. But like with any good conspiracy, everything is connected. I want to tell you a spooky story. My name is Aaron Moulton, and I am a curator and anthropologist looking at the ways in which creative practice is purposed and managed by different traditional and non-traditional means, ranging from New Age spiritual communities, the global art world, and propaganda initiatives. However, I am not just observing. I'm actively using my platform to create data and apply theory. A gonzo mix of participatory anthropology and tactical anthropology. What is data in this sense, and how am I applying theory? I'm going to try to explain that here, and it will start with a simple question of what is art? I'll return to that question throughout this talk. I am a seeker, and have spent my life trying to understand all of the mystical ways in which art is used by very different kinds of communities, by trying to understand all of the pseudo-scientific ways in which value is created and energy transmitted through objects and actions. My specialization is rooted in curatorial research, engaging cultural tribes, religious groups, using the exhibition as an altar, as a space for ritual, magical thinking, divination, shamanism, the occult, and witchcraft, with the belief that art's aboriginal function is as a vehicle for spirituality, a powerful disruptor of consciousness. Each tribe offers a tool, a new angle to the prism. And while I have engaged in various anthropological exhibitions, thought experiments, and collaborations to support that belief, I always needed to find a path that was not rooted in woo, the numinous, or the ineffable. I'm going to introduce an important and technically non-spiritual case study as an entry point for considering the power of this question about what art is. This is a research study that involves 17 years of qualitative and quantitative research, followed by a large-scale and controversial exhibition called The Influencing Machine. And in it all is a revelation of secrets and tactics. At the heart of this narrative lies the enigmatic Soros Center for Contemporary Art Network, a spontaneous constellation of 20 contemporary art centers that swiftly emerged across post-communist Eastern Europe during the 90s, that was funded by billionaire and philanthropic activist George Soros. Landing like a UFO, the SCCA network brought with it an avant-garde concept of contemporary art, aimed at exorcising the specters of the Soviet Union through the elixir of civil society. A force for democracy, the SCCA network vanished nearly as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind a legacy that would forever haunt the art world through coercive philanthropy, international biennials, and a close-knit circle of curators. But I am not going to talk about democracy, the NGO movement, neoliberalism, or the open society. I have already spoken and written at length about those subjects. They are a given, and they are, in my opinion, a smokescreen. For the sake of time, I'm going to talk about this story through the lens of experimental social engineering and how contemporary art was a weapon. You see, most people in the West, especially in America, but also Western Europe, don't know that George Soros is probably the greatest philanthropist that the contemporary art world and that the path for globalization in the contemporary art world has ever seen. And when we think about the great karmic and vanity values of being a great philanthropist in the Western art world, you want your name all over that stuff. And for some reason, we're not aware that George Soros set up, where's my fucking slide? Boom. That George Soros set up 20 centers for contemporary art, all at the same time, all through Eastern Europe, and brought some of the most advanced practice that the industry has ever seen. It is a glaring absence in our historical record, and not just a reference point for the globalization of the art world, it's arguably a cornerstone. Transformations of this scope and depth do not occur by accident. To analyze the network, I built a vast oral history archive with over 100 hours of interviews, assembled a large database archive, and reconstructed the history of each of the 20 art centers. This collection of information revealed a timeline of events, innovations, anomalies, and a pattern of behavior, of emergent behavior. It shows a profound understanding in the potentials of art and human behavior that goes way beyond how that narrative has been established in official art histories. I have 3 anomalous but very significant thesis points that change this understanding of what is art. Firstly, you see the most advanced form of curatorial practice that my industry has ever known. The SCCA is a culture that understood radical notions of context, public space, unprecedented coercive collectivizing of artistic practice, how to engage uninitiated publics without pretext, and efforts that would result in very visible social changes. Number 2, and as a result, at the artist level, you see the most advanced form of socially engaged practice, emerging in bizarrely simultaneous locations across the network. And when understood as a data point, this unprecedented, synchronized passage of information and mimicry of practice does not naturally spread like that. Not in the West, not in the analog world of the 90s, and definitely not in formerly closed societies. And all of this was created through the most advanced internets and media technologies that these regions had ever seen, that we, our civilization, had ever seen. We must remember here Arthur C. Clarke's quote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indecipherable from magic. And as my last point, within it all, you see the emergence of an idea known as tactical media. Officially coined in 1996, but already formally happening in experimental forms prior to its naming in 1990. It opens media up to more theoretical frameworks that put the power to create and mediate images and experiences into unpredictable hands. We give it other names like culture jamming, hacking, dilemma actions, detournement, etc. And yet tactical media is not art, but in fact the weaponization of perception and perception management. The notion of tactical media comes from the writings of Michel de Certeau and his book, The Practice of Everyday Life, an essential anthropology of contemporary humans that breaks our patterns of behavior into ideas of strategies and tactics. De Certeau argues that once we see the overarching strategies that create the social patterns, we can tactically engage them and even subvert them and reclaim power by using the system and its rules against itself. Today, we are well aware of the layers of mediation between you and reality. It might look something like this. If you truly want to affect reality, then intervening in those layers will likely have a greater effect on reality and how that reality is perceived. Back in Eastern Europe, the desovietization process, or the decoupling from the Soviet Union, is actively taking place through these exact experimental exercises across the enormous SCCA network like a carte blanche. In the vulnerable post-communist context, publics were suddenly introduced to Western advertising, perception management, newfound relationships to public space and discourse. The permitted desecration of old monuments became the consecration of new beginnings, and the invention of sacred tradition. The result is a cultural exorcism with weaponized aesthetics and scripted avant-gardes, using the avant-garde as a limit tester to produce data that could be usable by the NGO, by testing limits of society, bureaucracy, traditions, etc. This advanced curatorial and artistic practice is then passed virally through the art world industry via biennials and coercive philanthropy. Today, socially engaged practice is the exclusive way in which an artist is allowed to use their creative abilities. That is, art for activism and social change. And we see it used with pro-Western, often globally conscious issues such as climate, migration, gender, and identity issues. I'm not saying any of those issues are wrong or invalid, but we must acknowledge that they are overtaking the messaging of the medium and question that message's allegiance to a political order. And we must rightly bring such narratives to account. But importantly, and for discussing the origin story of this project, the art industry performs exhaustive audits on the history and origins of pop art all the time, every 5 years. Why not apply that same academic rigor to what has become the art world's most important and enduring aesthetic movement of socially engaged practice? This story is where the stone hits the pond. Point zero. This is the invention of sacred tradition, and everything afterwards is a ripple of patterns echoing. But there is an occult problem. It is impossible to publicly discuss the work of George Soros, as he is a weaponized Rorschach in culture. Saying his name, just saying his name, one triggers one into a pick-a-side mentality just at the utterance. It's like a spell. Any effort to analyze his work is met with allegations of anti-Semitism. It is literally spooky. But this story is not a conspiracy theory, no. This is art history. And it is a huge blind spot in art history, and within it are important ways for establishing new ideas for what is art. And we have to learn from it. My industry doesn't like this story and has intentionally left it out because it demonstrates how easy it is to manipulate and move the needle, especially at a large scale. It shows that art is a Trojan horse. I needed to tell this story. Trust me, I did. I needed to tell this story, and I produced a large-scale exhibition with 50 artists from across the entire region, mostly leftists, many of whom were directly involved in the network, have questioned this story over time, and who knew the risks in telling the story. And the risk was enormous, because nowhere in my industry was it possible to present this research. And it forced me to take it to a politicized place. I brought this project to the world's first right-wing contemporary art museum. A technically important mainstream contemporary art museum in Warsaw, Poland, that had been hijacked by the new right-wing government. I always knew this story could be weaponized, but avoided doing so. And yet, I knew these right-wing people would like this story. as it fit their agenda, their own narratives about globalization and George Soros. But the problem is that my story is very data-driven and has the seal of approval of all the people involved, both artists and SCCA alumni alike, and it becomes very hard to dismiss it as fringe theory. And then I embarked on a journey and infiltrated a new religious tribe of people, the Polish right-wing government. They had taken over all of the country's prestigious institutions and museums, and I wanted to know, what were they doing with art? They had been openly blacklisted across the industry, and I was concerned that their story and their intentions were being misrepresented by the media, an attempt to write it all off as hate speech disguised as free speech. However, what I found was even more troubling for my industry to come to terms with had it had the guts to confront it. Media is not just what is revealed, but it's also what is not revealed. Socially engaged practice uses a tactical arithmetic of cultural signs, political messaging, and conceptual materials to further an agenda, a narrative, a perception of reality. Imagine now that socially engaged practice was created in a social engineering laboratory in Eastern Europe in the 90s. It goes on to dominate the global art world. And one day, Frankenstein's monster comes home. Right-wing contemporary art is mirroring our mainstream art world's socially engaged practice, but now for their purposes, their narrative, and their politics, using the devil's tools to bring him down. And we have no problem pointing a finger at them and shouting, "That's propaganda!" But the problem, of course, is that if that's propaganda, then, well, this is propaganda as well. It's all propaganda. When a mirror of this kind is put up, it reveals that all of our contemporary art institutions are platforms for memory politics, mouthpieces for propaganda. All of them. I have always been very clear that what the enormous SCCA network did was, in fact, not art. Calling it art is a misnaming. Calling it art is a simplistic ruse, a deception, a way to relax your mind and let it in the front door. Art is a placebo that creates a semantic shift where we relax the mind and allow it to be art, even though we don't know what art is. Because no one really knows what art is, especially not those uninitiated publics from the 90s in Eastern Europe who were having social experiments done right in their face. They were told, relax, it's just art. But even in the Western art world, it can be a mystery, as everyone's confidence is driven by groupthink, from the power and influence of others, by the market, and by what our institutions decide. Art is the tip of the spear for how ideology enters the system and becomes culture. But when research-based practices are questioned or held accountable, art has no ethical responsibility. In fact, if held accountable, art is given a pass because it's a poem, a form of free expression that is not scientific. Art imitates life, however, tactical media imitates both. In art, we have come to expect visual games that trick the eye or the mind and even subvert society and culture. We often permit the artist to do these tricks of tactical media, like pulling a rabbit from the hat, Duchamp's Ready-Made or Maurizio Catalan's Little Jokes, breaking language and disorienting conventional ways of seeing and communicating. Today, tactical media has been assimilated into the general spectrum of media, integrated within Hollywood marketing and memes. Just another letter in the alphabet. It becomes hard, if not impossible, to detect. I have created this graphic to understand a language of tactical media literacy, which is not just about observing, but it's about making do and using the structure to produce new results. And I believe it is in the intentional usage of these tactics that we will find new opportunities for sacred traditions. New ways to trick the consciousness of the unprepared mind. I'm not going to go through everything here because it's highly intuitive. It's a feeling, and you'll get it right away. It's rooted in mirroring. The Macarena. The Macarena. Think about the Macarena and how I can transmit that dance to you like a virus. A ritual of movement where we pass a sacred energy between each other. Let's start at the bottom. Bricolage is our intuitive way to make do. It is survival in the face of adversity and is the natural human learning process for adapting. Connected with this term, bricolage, the red and the yellow sections are in some senses innocent and without intentions. Learning system would be pattern mapping coming from artificial intelligence and algorithms, which goes to the red section of instinct, survival, to show the basic ways in which we participate in creating tactical media exercises for ourselves, play, camouflage, pareidolia. That's like spotting shapes in the clouds. Red goes to white with placebo. Placebo is important because it's this incredible way in which we can trick our minds into virtually anything. And so I've put it on the line with the white because, well, that's where intentions start to come in. It goes from being natural adaptational play to more intention-based forms of tactical media. Light intentions are related to spiritual occurrences, divination, etc. Like we learned this morning from the Kibbo Keft, karaoke is very spiritual. It's channeling and mirroring to emancipate yourself within the situation. And then, black propaganda, why is that on the line? It's black. Well, in its very nature, you don't know where black propaganda comes from. It's the most nefarious form of propaganda. We don't know who did it or who wins, but people lose. It creates confusion and is a pure act of chaos. And within the black is the spectrum of dark intentions, and fakery is one of them, which connects perfectly like a Turing test to the yellow section. How can we better navigate the energetic paradoxes of everyday life through tactical storytelling, magical thinking, and setting intentions? In Infiltrating the Right-Wing Contemporary Art Museum with my exhibition, I didn't throw the right wing a softball, no. I used everything I learned about experimental curating, tactical media, and socially engaged practice of the Soros network, about cultural exorcism, weaponized aesthetics, semiotic shamanism, active measures, sacrilege, and monument therapy, about art as propaganda. And I mirrored it back like a recursive ritual. I raised a false flag. I forged a secret conspiratorial manual. And I made a live satanic event on TV? When I brought Gypsy Roma witches inside the conservative right-wing castle to perform an occult ritual above a pentagram, I told my terrified Polish Catholic museum director the exact same thing that the SCCA told their viewers. Relax. It's just art. And like a Trojan horse, it caused a chaotic situational irony where nobody's position was given a pass. Not the right, not the left, the liberal, or the NGO, because this was, in fact, a spiritual case study. This was an intervention in political consciousness and a battle for our hearts and minds. If we look at this graph for opportunities, mixing the categories and the intentions, these offer alternative notions of source, unpredictable pathways, and unconventional forms of messaging. One of the most important books on my path was this story. One of the most important books on my path with this story is the anthology, The Invention of Sacred Tradition. I have used it like a recipe book, a tactical manual. These histories of channeling, of newly sacred artifacts, of situational divinity, are all devotional forgeries. They are tactical media, satisfying the stories we are desperate to hear. I mean this in a positive way, and not to discredit anything. I am a true believer. I mean this as a way to awaken our toolkit for inventing the sacred. Thanks.
If you can't see it, then you just never know.